It's the final Friday before the 2025 Baseball Hall of Fame ballot results are announced, so we have time to look at one final player up for election. Rounding off this series will be a player that is somewhat divided among people, Carlos Beltran. We'll get to that reasoning later, but first, who exactly is this player? How good was he? And should he get elected into the Baseball Hall of Fame? Carlos Beltran was a center fielder who played in Major League Baseball for 20 seasons from 1998 to 2017. He played for 7 teams in his career, but spent the most time with the Kansas City Royals and New York Mets. In his career, Beltran played in nearly 2,600 games and came to the plate over 11,000 times. He slashed .279 with a .350 on base and .486 slugging for an .837 OPS and 119 adjusted OPS. He has over 2,700 hits, which includes nearly 1,100 extra base hits, over 300 stolen bases, nearly 1,600 runs scored, nearly 1,600 RBIs, over 4,750 total bases, reached base over 3,850 times, and earned 70.1 WAR. He's a 9-time All-Star, 3-time Gold Glove Award winner, won the 1999 American League Rookie of the Year award, and received MVP votes in 7 seasons. You probably remember Beltran best for one of 2 reasons. Either A, his postseason success, where he was one of the greatest hitters in playoff history, or B, his involvement in the 2017 Astros scandal, which we'll get to later. Based off the stats mentioned, I think everybody watching now has a good indication on just how good Beltran was. He was undoubtedly one of the premier 5-tool players during his career. His 1,100 extra base hits, 300 plus stolen bases, and multiple gold gloves all speak for themselves. By the way, if anybody was wondering, he specifically has 435 career home runs, but I'll be covering all extra base hits in this video. Anyway, while those are fantastic numbers, just how good was he when compared to players during his career, as well as all time? From 1998 to 2017, Beltran ranks inside the top 5 in total bases, runs scored, hits, and extra base hits, and top 10 in RBIs, WAR, times on base, and stolen bases. Among 47 players with at least 7,500 plate appearances here, Beltran has both the 22nd highest OPS and 22nd highest adjusted OPS. If we look at just center fielders, it should be no surprise that Beltran is first in all of the mentioned stats, with one exception, where he ranks 6th in stolen bases. Same situation for his analytics, as out of the 6 center fielders with at least 7,500 plate appearances, he has the highest OPS and highest adjusted OPS. Even if we lower the minimum threshold to 6,000 plate appearances, in which there were 14 center fielders with that amount, Beltran only drops to 2nd in both categories, where he's behind the legendary Ken Griffey Jr. Clearly one of the best in the league during his time in baseball. But how good was he during his prime? I usually look at 10-year windows for a player's prime years, but instead, I'm going to discuss a 12-year span for Beltran, because honestly, I just couldn't decide on which 10-year period to pick. He was pretty good for a while. From 2001 to 2012, he ranks inside the top 3 in WAR, top 10 in extra base hits, runs, and stolen bases, top 15 in RBIs, total bases, and times on base, and top 25 in hits. Among 82 players with at least 5,000 plate appearances in this 12-year stretch, Beltran has the 22nd highest OPS and 19th highest adjusted OPS. For center fielders, he's inside the top 4 in all of the mentioned stats. Here's a full breakdown of those placements, highlighted by having the highest WAR at his position. There were 8 center fielders with at least 5,000 plate appearances in these 12 seasons, and Beltran is once again first in both OPS and adjusted OPS. If we lower the minimum threshold to 3,000 plate appearances, where there are 31 center fielders, he drops to 3rd in OPS and 4th in adjusted OPS. That was all in comparison to players during Beltran's time in the league. What about looking at players all time? Throughout the history of Major League Baseball, Carlos Beltran is inside the top 30 in extra base hits, top 45 in total bases and RBIs, top 60 in runs and times on base, top 70 in hits and WAR, and top 165 in stolen bases. Among 87 players with at least 10,000 plate appearances, he has the 39th highest OPS and 57th highest adjusted OPS. For what it's worth, if we lower the threshold to 7,500 plate appearances, in which there's been 365 players to achieve that amount, Beltrán now has the 113th highest OPS and 164th highest adjusted OPS. When looking at center fielders, Beltrán is within the top 10 in all of these counting stats, with one exception again, where he ranks 36th for most stolen bases. Among 47 center fielders with at least 7,500 plate appearances, he has the 13th highest OPS and 21st highest adjusted OPS. I haven't mentioned anything regarding his defense yet, so for a very quick summary, Beltrán excelled in center field both with traditional stats and advanced ones as well. His putouts, assists, and double plays turned are all within the top 35 among center fielders all time. For advanced stats, his career range factor per game is within the top 25 of all center fielders, and his total zone runs are in the top 85 of all players regardless of position. Additionally, there was an 11-year stretch from 1999 to 2009 where Beltrán earned 10.5 D-WAR. That's the second most of any center fielder during that span, only behind Andruw Jones. That was a lot said. So to sum up everything so far, during Beltrán's entire career, he was among the top 10 in the league in counting stats. His offensive analytics are just outside the top 20, but given his elite defense and base running, one can certainly argue he was a top 10 player in the league. For center fielders, he was the clear-cut best. Same situation for his prime years, around the top 10 player in the league and the best at his position. Throughout baseball history, Beltrán is within the top 70 in all but one counting stat, so it wouldn't be far-fetched to say he was the top 70 position player ever to play baseball. For players at his position, there's a strong argument he's a top 10 center fielder of all time. At worst, just outside the top 10. Given all of that, I think it's pretty obvious that based on the numbers alone, Carlos Beltran is a Hall of Famer. His 70.1 WAR is the highest of any non-active center fielder that is not in the Hall of Fame. The average Hall of Fame center fielder has 71.5 WAR, so he's right in line with what's expected from an all-time great. Who cares about WAR, you might say? Well, also consider the fact that Beltrán is one of the greatest well-rounded players in baseball history. Remember, he has 435 home runs and 312 stolen bases. There are only 4 other players in the history of Major League Baseball with at least 400 home runs and 300 stolen bases. Those 4 are Barry Bonds, Alex Rodriguez, Willie Mays, and Andre Dawson. 2 Hall of Famers, 2 PED users, and Carlos Beltran. Actually, speaking of Hall of Famer Andre Dawson, he is the perfect player to compare Beltran to. Dawson played over 1,000 games in center field and roughly 1,300 in right field, so while one might consider him a right fielder, he did play a significant number of games at the same position as Beltran. Here is a side-by-side comparison of various stats. In a near identical amount of plate appearances, the two players have very similar amounts of hits, extra base hits, stolen bases, RBIs, and total bases. Even their adjusted OPS marks are exactly the same. Like Beltran, Dawson was an excellent fielder as well, winning 8 Gold Glove awards. If you believe Andre Dawson rightfully deserves to be in, you ought to believe Beltran deserves to be in as well. I didn't even once mention Beltran's playoff performances yet. In 256 postseason plate appearances, Beltran has an incredible 1.021 OPS. There have been over 100 players in MLB history with at least 200 plate appearances in the postseason. Beltran's OPS is the highest of all time, seriously. Even if we lower the threshold to 150 plate appearances, in which there's been over 200 players, Beltran still has the 4th highest OPS, only behind Babe Ruth, Lou Gehrig, and George Brett, aka 3 Hall of Famers. Arguably the greatest postseason hitter of all time, at worst, still in the top 4. With that being said, there is one major implication that I've yet to mention, and it's the reason why Beltrán is still on the ballot and not already enshrined. Long story short, Carlos Beltran was one of the main people behind the Astro sign stealing scandal in 2017. I'm not going to go into the details, as discussing it would make this video an hour long. The entire scandal is long documented online, and there are several videos on the subject already on YouTube. In a quick and simplified recap, Beltrán, along with bench coach Alex Cora, were the two main people in charge of the operation. By no means were they solely responsible, but the illegal sign stealing would not have started without them. Cora was suspended for a year, as was the manager AJ Hinch and general manager Jeff Luhnow. Beltrán, on the other hand, was not suspended, because Rob Manfred gave the Astros players immunity. A decision he's come to regret, but that's another story. After news of the scandal broke, Beltrán publicly apologized, and 5 years later, now works as an assistant to the Mets general manager. As for the Hall of Fame, it really boils down to that. Does Beltrán's involvement in the sign stealing scandal cancel any consideration for the Hall of Fame? That idea could warrant its own video and is ultimately up to your opinion. Personally, I'm going to say the scandal should not have an effect, Beltrán should be in the Hall of Fame, and I'll tell you why. Currently, there are PED users that are not in the Hall of Fame that I believe should be in. In my opinion, it would be unjust to say someone who cheated like Beltrán should not be in, but others who cheated in another way should be in. You can't exclude someone for one infraction and include others for a different infraction. Argue with me all you want, that's the stance I'm taking. If you think that's an unpopular opinion, I would disagree, given the uptick in Hall of Fame votes he's received. He received 46.5% of the vote on his first year eligible, and 57% on his second year. As of January 12th, he has over 77% of the publicly released vote. Reminder that a player only needs 75% to get elected. It would not be surprising at all to see him get voted in this Tuesday. At the end of the day, Carlos Beltran was one of the greatest center fielders, not just during his career, but of all time. He demonstrated elite skill in all 5 areas of the game, and will forever be enshrined in the Baseball Hall of Fame.